In recent times, there have been growing discussions on the concept of the natural capital approach, referring to a more holistic view of how a business impacts the environment. The approach enables companies to understand both their impacts and dependencies on natural capital assets, together with understanding business risk and opportunities. This topic is relevant for companies in Malaysia, given Malaysia's proximity to nature, especially in certain industries like agriculture. This introductory video seeks to provide a starting point for Malaysian companies to understand three main questions. What is the natural capital approach? And why is it important? And how can companies use it? Nature can be defined as all non-human living entities and their interaction with other living or non-living physical entities and processes. This includes the animals and plants on our land and in our seas, the soil our crops grow on, even the air we breathe. Nature is not only all around, but humans are intricately tied to nature for all our needs. These resources provide provisioning services, or in other words, have tangible benefits to people. Some are renewable, such as pulp, fish, and water. Others are non-renewable, such as the metals and minerals we use to build our computers, phones, and buildings, and fossil fuels to power our world. These resources are not just provisional, but also have regulatory services and supporting services, such as the examples you see on the screen. For example, bees and bats help with pollination, and forests and oceans help with climate regulation. Overexploitation of natural resources leads to a host of issues such as species extinction, soil degradation, and outbreaks of infectious diseases. An analysis by the World Bank found that a conservative estimate for the collapse of selected natural services could result in $2.7 trillion of decline in global GDP in 2030, a significant decline. According to the World Resources Institute, Malaysia ranked 6th among 10 tropical countries that lost the most primary forest in 2019. Deforestation in Malaysia is mainly driven by factors such as commercial logging, commercial agribusiness, mining, and so on. This poses risks not just for businesses, but also for communities in the form of decreased rainfall, pollution, and higher local temperatures. Businesses in Malaysia can actively advocate for environmental protection by adopting a natural capital approach as part of their value creation strategies. When we think about capital, we often only consider financial, manufactured, and human capital, and natural capital is often left out of the conversation. Companies need to ensure a holistic approach to managing all forms of capital, ensuring they create long-term value for stakeholders and lead to business resilience. If you are familiar with integrated reporting, the IIRC identifies 6 capitals that companies should report on, including natural capital, that helps companies apply integrated thinking in their decision-making processes. Companies should be asking themselves, what benefits to people does natural capital and environmental assets bring about? Here's another way to think of it. Imagine that nature is a trust fund, and humans are the beneficiaries. Humans live off the interest that the fund provides. The air, water, raw materials, carbon storage, its ability to regulate climate and mitigate floods, and so on. If humans keep dipping into the capital by clearing too much forest, for example, we're going to see diminishing returns from those dividends. This approach helps us to account for the benefits which organizations, business, and society receive from nature. And by measuring and valuing natural capital, companies can then make decisions to manage these natural assets. Companies may already be familiar with the concept of ESG. So what's the difference? While natural capital may seem like another new term in the ever-growing sustainability dictionary, it is actually a part of the E in ESG. A natural capital approach is a holistic view of how a business impacts the environment. Climate action now occupies a large focus in ESG, as companies are now setting targets to reduce their carbon emissions. Similarly, a natural capital approach helps companies to account for the value that nature brings for climate mitigation. In other words, accounting for natural capital will help companies approach ESG more holistically and make decisions to internalize and sustain the value they derive from nature. The natural capital approach also helps companies to ensure that risks stemming from neglect of nature is averted. According to the World Economic Forum, extreme weather, climate action failure, and human-led environmental damage are the highest risks that we will face with the greatest likelihood in the next 10 years. So, how do we apply the natural capital approach? For a start, companies should assess how nature relates to their business model, supply chain, operations, and stakeholders in terms of the direct and indirect impact, dependencies, risks, and opportunities. Companies can also consider their value chain boundary, be it upstream, downstream, or in their direct operations. By doing these, companies can then identify the most material natural capital impacts and dependencies. Once the impact and dependencies are known, companies should then start measuring the value of two things. First, the impact that their operations are having on their own business or on society. This also includes current or future regulatory costs, such as environmental taxes, permits or fines, costs of treatment, etc. The second is to measure dependencies on natural capital, such as food, fiber, fuel, flood protection, etc. This should be expressed as quantified units wherever possible, for example, total water use or water use per unit of product. Other factors that may be relevant to the financial value of a dependency include the cost of substitute inputs or the cost of improving resource efficiency, for example, new technology. And after going through the entire assessment, your company should begin acting on the results, and this could include internalizing externalities such as an internal carbon or water shadow price. Companies should also communicate their results with the relevant stakeholders and discuss with them the next steps to take. An important outcome of a natural capital assessment would be to embed findings into the company, and this could even mean rethinking how business is conducted. To help you understand better, let's look at a case study from Coca-Cola, a company which has already adopted a natural capital approach to their resource use. Coca-Cola has set up several plants across the world to extract water to manufacture their beverages. In the past, it was directly competing for these water resources, which local communities rely on. Back in 2003, Coca-Cola was accused of depleting water sources and poisoning the land in Kerala, India. It was eventually fined $47 million for damage to the environment. Since then, Coca-Cola has committed to better management of their water and have set targets to replenish water used from sources. Here are a few pages of a report they published which outlines how they use the Natural Capital Protocol as a framework for 7 of their water replenishment projects in Europe. First, they reviewed what ecosystem services their projects provided. Second, they cross-checked their priorities by comparing with global average values through a qualitative and quantitative review. Lastly, they supplemented this knowledge with a literature review so as to make sure they were aligned with other sources. This gave them the final scope for their methodology as seen here. They were able to identify the 7 key ecosystem services as seen on the left-hand side deriving from their projects. Finally, these ecosystem services from their projects were valued in monetary terms. They also listed down the different calculations they did for each ecosystem service. For example, water quality improvements from the projects were valued at the costs avoided in treating the pollutant load. This allows them to see the economic benefits the company created for themselves and the community, which builds a strong business case for action. From the studies conducted on their 7 water replenishment programs in Europe, they found that most investments did lead to higher returns in terms of the value of the ecosystem services on their business and the community. In the long run, this is helping the company to better steer business decisions towards a more impactful intervention. So that's a high-level overview of how companies can use the natural capital approach to assess the value of natural capital that they rely on and make progress towards mitigating against future risks and improving the value of the environment to sustain their business. To find out more, we'd recommend the following resources.